Great. Okay, so this is really a pitch, really to kind of appeal for a really important aspect of our data ecosystem. So actually, in my day job, I'm a professor of AI, and AI is on everybody's lips. But I think the interesting thing about data is that much AI will not bear the fruits that are promised without these very strong data infrastructures. So I want to take us back. I want to take us back to the revolution that happened around genomics. The human genome, remarkable, sequenced, understood, millions of base pairs analyzed, entire fields given rise and emerging based on understanding the biochemistry and the mechanics of the gene. And here is the main character in the middle there, chromosome 1 on the left. And as we understand more and more about what the gene structure does and is, how it's regulated and managed, we begin, for example, to detect and understand which parts of the genome are responsible for varieties of disease. And on chromosome 1, we have some indicative areas there from Alzheimer's to prostate cancer to glaucoma that are implicated in these conditions. Hugely important. Now, I want to take you back to that era when we were trying to understand the genome. There was a remarkable moment when both the great magazines, the great periodicals of science, Science itself and Nature, co-published the Human Genome, you may remember. And this was released to great fanfare. There was at the time a huge debate on whether or not human genes could or could not be patented. Okay? There were in fact industries that were being set up on the premise that gene areas could in a sense be IP. And that aspects of the knowledge of genomic structure would be closed. And in fact, it was a Supreme Court ruling that ruled that human genes couldn't be patented that kind of really opened up the space for the genomics revolution. And I would submit to you that is a fantastic example of the power of open data. It has generated almost $1 trillion by an estimate undertaken for the US government, $1 trillion of economic impact. If you summarize the original output from the original $14.5 billion of public taxpayers' investment in the science in the US. And the most important thing about that, it is multiplied that effect by being around open data available for open innovation. Now, of course, drug companies and gene companies will come on and try and develop processes and methods that they can then sell out into the world and develop new classes of drugs and understanding from that. But the fundamental underpinning infrastructure, the knowledge and data about genomics, is open to all. GPS signal, military encrypted signal for a long time, put up there to give Western military superiority on the battlefield. At the point at which it was argued to open up the signal, to make it available for civilian use, a multi-billion-dollar industry, a set of industries were born. And again, if you look at the analysis, this is 2013 data for 1 year, and this is well before the pervasive deployment that we now see, but these are pretty accurate figures from 2013, $55 billion of additional revenue in GPS-driven services in the US alone. Okay. The idea that you would close down accurate geospatial location data, not make that part of our public data infrastructure, would seem incredible. I submit to you that it is incredible, and there are classes of data that should always remain part of our public data infrastructure. Who maintains it, curates it? Big questions to face. But the power of open is power indeed. It's not a new idea. Interestingly, if you go back, and we talk about data science as if it's kind of a modern invention, but you go back to the bills of mortality that were first collected in London in the 16th and 17th centuries. You've got these wonderfully detailed lists of what people died of, and there are some conditions there that really do set you thinking. Teeth killed 644 people in London. I mean, that is abscesses of the tooth which went into your brain and killed you. Everything from apoplexy and suddenly dying to the ague to gout to French pox. There's a whole range of things. The thing you learn from that is the most dangerous thing to be in the 17th century was below 2 years of age. Extraordinary mortality rates. Those bills of mortality gave rise to one of the most successful industries we have in the UK, the insurance industries. Actuarial tables of mortality drove insurance. Data that is openly available on risk drives the insurance markets. And there's two rather interesting infographics there. These are from the ONS, Office of National Statistics, what we died of in 2 years. And again, that makes very interesting reading, where you start to see, this is as declared on the death certificates of people in the UK, 2% less people died the year after. Yeah, very interesting that. Anyway, you can compare and contrast. Things get reclassified, but the power of that data is extraordinary. The Open Data Institute that Tim and I founded 5 years ago, we've been working with government, with private sector, with startups to show the benefits of building a strong and durable data infrastructure, one that is as open as possible as far as we can make it. And we're trying to develop that in sectors as broad-ranging as pharmaceutical sectors, through to banking, through to transport. And at the ODI, we've been also incubating startups in this space. I'm going to give you one example, a few examples of where data sets have been released that are making a difference right now. DEFRA, the department for essentially that looks after agriculture and environment, released thousands of data sets just in the last couple of years, actually. It was a department that was quite late to this. But everything from river levels to flood warnings to groundwater data, much more available, services can be driven off them. You wouldn't believe how many of the data sets collected by government still and have been historically locked down under restrictive licenses. We're very keen on making this stuff open. One of our great poster examples, Poster Children for Open Data, is Transport for London. Transport for London makes all of its transport data real-time, openly available. With a well-developed API, you can find out everything from where the buses are to what the tubes are doing to where the buses are running and so on. This is fantastic for all of us, and it has already benefited not just Transport for London. It used to build their own apps and had a small group selling them. Now they make the data available to a very high quality with an available API. We have fantastic examples from Citymapper onwards. So I can tell a great story about why we need open data, what the use cases are. I can give you examples from the healthcare system where when we released data on hospital infection rates, we saw an 80% reduction over 3 years in hospital-acquired infections. Why? Because nobody wanted to be at the bottom of those league tables in terms of hospital-acquired infections. They started to look at best practice. They shared best practice with those people at the top who had the least rates, and they discovered it was really simple stuff. Deep cleaning. It was about washing your hands when you went into the wards. It was about a range of measures that together have made a dramatic impact. Data of high quality shared widely. Now, in all of this talk about open data, we often refer to data that is generic, not about individuals. It's about the buses. It's about where the post boxes are. It's about where the cash points are. But it's not about individuals. In all of this talk about the data ecosystem, a key feature is our personal data. And a number of years ago, I was working with government to try and develop this concept of my data, our data, your data. This is going to be one of the revolutionary causes in the next few years. As we become increasingly aware of what the various internet services, the big platforms collect and know about us. I was reading the paper just today, somebody had put in a request, a Tinder user had got 800 pages back, and there it all was. In the terms and conditions of a Tinder user, this matchmaking site, there's a statement that says, your data may not be secure and we will be able to share it. Okay? And you just think about what the consequences of that are. I think there's a huge issue that we have to understand about what our personal individual rights are, consumers and customers and citizens' rights, as opposed to business and states' rights over our data. So, yeah, I can give you the example from the commercial world, but there's the cradle to grave, wonderful diagram of all the databases that the government collects about me on my journey as a UK citizen from cradle to grave. Much of it not integrated. Perhaps you might think that's a good thing. But the point is, what's your stake in that data? How much control do you have on it? So one of the things we've been doing at the ODI is developing a language to explain the nuances between general publicly available data, insurance, death data, mortality data, transport data, genomics, research data, and personal data. How do you explain that world? And we developed this concept called the data spectrum. And we want to recognize that on the data spectrum, at one end, quite rightly, there is closed personal data, personal to you, perhaps personal or closed to an organization who do not wish to share under any circumstances that information. That it could be small, medium, or large data. It could be personal, commercial, or government data, but it actually is sensitive, and we need to respect that. But as you move along that spectrum, you get more permissive regimes where individuals can be named to have access to particular data assets. Or you can have data that is more understandably shared between groups of individuals. For example, your medical records, between primary and secondary healthcare, between social care, perhaps, of course, we would hope, with us ourselves. And there's a really interesting question about how we are empowered with that data. And on through to public access data. Data that is available, but there are some limits around just how widely you might use that. And at the far, if you like, is it the left or right? The thing with the spectrum, it kind of gets all these linguistic connotations. But on the spectrum is genuinely open data that anyone can use with an open license. Now, you look at that spectrum and you think, what does that tell you about the amount, the quantity, how much information we might want? And I'd submit to you that what we're aspiring to do here is build a data ecosystem whose foundation is as much open, publicly available data as possible. That data does not just originate with the government, with the public sector. It could as well be made available from the private sector. And one of the things we're doing at the ODI is talking to businesses about where some of their data assets are more valuable to them and their customers as open data. A very good example was working with Thomson Reuters around the notion of financial product identifiers, which had formerly been sold. They had thousands of these identifiers, formerly been sold as a catalogue. They made them available openly. It became a very strong reference set of data that people could use to reference. It was held by a large organization, and the organization, traffic was driven to those identifiers. They could then hang services off that information. So consider where some of your key data may form a part of a data infrastructure, a shared data infrastructure for everyone. Because data, make no mistake, is an infrastructure. We have an infrastructure commission that worries about our transport links, our rail network, our distribution, our power grid. But every bit as important is a data infrastructure. What do I mean by that? Well, on the right, we've got from the Ordnance Survey some of our most important geospatial data. This is a so-called URI. This identifies part of the geography of the United Kingdom. This should be openly available, freely available. This part is, not all Ordnance Survey data is. I wish it were. Perhaps one day it will be. And this data is available for people to use reliably and to build services on. The point is that the data providers with these canonical open data sets can build services as well. They understand this data perhaps better than anyone else. On the left, we've got our Transport for London Unified API. I referred to that earlier on. From transport to utilities, to companies that are owned and constituted in this country, to our geospatial data, to our data about health outcomes, to our data about where our sports facilities are, to every aspect where it doesn't impinge on me as an individual and personally identify me, there is a case for a public data infrastructure. So my prediction is not just to think of data as oil. It's a poor analogy in lots of ways. It's actually infrastructure, and it's the infrastructure for the 21st century. If AI is going to succeed, it's going to need data. There'll be an interesting question about who will control that data in the future, who can do the AI if only the data sets are held in certain places. So make that foundation as broad as possible, Open data is the foundation for a data infrastructure in the 21st century. Thank you.